Welcome to the Deeper Podcast. Now join our host, Chris Standridge, along with pastor and author, Dave Vance.
Hey, welcome everybody. It's the Deeper Podcast. My name is Chris Standridge, and I am the community's pastor at Crossroads Church in Mansfield, Ohio. Sitting next to me is Dave Vance, lead pastor of Crossroads, and we are excited to bring this podcast to you as we are traveling through our current sermon series called Can I Speak with the Manager? This week we're going to be talking about managing our emotions. Now, let's be honest, Dave, we're not doing a very good job with this as a society in recent years. We're kind of emotionally unstable as a nation right now. Cooler heads prevailing has kind of given way to fiery debates over shots and vaccines and COVID and race and political issues, to lack of reason, to battle lines being drawn, really a lack of unity in our nation, unlike we've probably seen since the Civil War. And so emotions are really running high in our world in this day and age. And, it's kind of amazing that when we go against God's word as humans, we kind of mess this up every time. And we are humans, and so we are going to fail. We are going to fumble our way through this. But one of the things that we are really good at is the fact that we are going to mess things up, and we're also going to have a God who forgives and offers grace. And so we want to talk through managing our emotions this week. And David, sometimes it's hard for churchgoers. It's kind of hard for people to understand that a pastor is also human. Yeah. I think a lot of times people that are maybe in the pulpit or in the pews or in the seats in the audience maybe think that a pastor is like superhuman in some ways, but the reality is that you're human just like everybody else, right? Like you are human.
Yes,
right.
I
okay.
am.
So if I poke you,
very human.
Yeah, I think about that line in Batman versus Superman where Batman asks Superman, "Do you bleed?" And I think sometimes people are quick to think that pastors are almost superhuman and that they don't mess up. So when we talk about our humanness, I want to ask you about your humanness in this area. What is it that gets the best of your emotions? What is the one thing that, no matter where you're at in life, when this happens, it just gets you fired up and you want to kind of like lose control?
Yeah, I never lose control. I am always... No, I'm just kidding.
Wow, maybe he is superhuman.
Yeah, no, and there is this concept pastors are closer to God, so somehow we get this all right. But no, we feel the same thing. And there are really two things I think about as you ask that question, what gets to me, what gets under my skin. And one of those, I can't stand injustice personally. So, for example, there are times and seasons where as pastors, you can't say something about a situation that you know full well about.
Right.
And you know that to say that immediately becomes gossip or it becomes inappropriate. And so as a pastor, as a leader, sometimes there are things that I know to be true or that I know happen behind the scenes, but I can't go tell everybody, and everybody's talking about another situation, this situation from another angle because someone else can say something about it or someone else, can go run their mouth. And there's something in me, Chris, that when that happens, like I want to go find that person and give them a smackdown because it bothers me of just that gossip is allowed on one end, but sometimes as a pastor, we just don't do that. God has called us differently. And so people can talk about a situation and they have no clue of the other side of that situation. Yeah. And that's being raw because I realize as I say that people might be like, I wonder what situation that is, especially if you're from Crossroads Church. But It happens all the time. We feel that. Secondly is disrespect. Like in my home, if one of my kids disrespects me, like that to me is a line cross. Yeah. I always tell my sons, you can ask me any question you want and I will give you an answer, but then you have to accept that answer. Right. And I'm very key on not saying, well, I told you so. I give them a direct answer. Here's why I think this is right. And when that disrespect comes back, that's one of those moments where like it is like a rage that boils out of me, and I have to be very careful how I respond to that, because it's like injustice. I want to fight somebody at that point. Yeah. And so when I feel disrespected, it fires me up pretty bad. How about for you? Like,
well, I'm starting to sense that you just are kind of likes to fight guy.
Well, my instinct when that boils out is like, is it fight or flight? I'm not a flight guy. I'm a fight guy.
Yeah, and that's what's interesting is, if I'm being honest, I'm probably more of a flight guy because I am a peacemaker, and so it's more easy for me to just run from the conflict than it is to run into it. But I know for me, mine's probably a little bit more shallow, but nonetheless very real. My emotions get really fired up when I'm fixing something. Whether it's a leaky pipe, whether it's a drain, whether it's something on my car, whether it's, I don't even know. I'm trying to think, like maybe something electrical in my house, and I've got girls around that are asking me questions and wanting to be involved. I usually go into fixing things with a defeatist attitude. Like, I'm going to try to fix this, but I know I'm not going to be able to. And so I already feel like I've lost. And so when I have girls or kids around that are asking questions or just kind of being there, I immediately get really tense and I lose my temper really fast. And it's never at them. It's always at myself. But it's always when I'm fixing stuff because I hate to fix things.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of my humanness in that way. And that's, I guess, the area where I fail and where my emotions get the best of me. On the flip side, so let's talk about a positive, right? What's something, what's a little something that brings some sunshine or some happiness to your life in the midst of storms? I know you had mentioned Wits on Sunday.
Yeah, I've mentioned Wits a couple times because Wits is amazing ice cream. Your daughter works there.
Yeah.
And
it's fantastic, by the way, because she brings ice cream home all the time.
I'm a little bit jealous of that. And, I need to talk to Sydney about the stock.
She'd set you up.
I believe that. I love Wits. Yeah, it's true. That always brings me a smile. I'm not as addicted as some people to it. There are some that go every day to it. We have it on a special occasion. The things I love. I get excited when I get to play golf.
Yeah.
Like if I know I'm going to get to play golf and it's going to be a beautiful day, I love that. I love going places. Like when Allison or the boys are like, let's go on a venture, or I'll say, let's go on a venture together. I really love getting away and exploring things. I love history. So, going to a monument to see it and reading the details of it. I love that kind of stuff. And that always seems to bring some sunshine. Simple things, hanging out with the family, certainly getting to play, hanging out with other people. I love pool parties. That always brings a little bit of delight to me as well. Yep. How about you?
Mine would be my motorcycle at this point. I got a motorcycle about 5 months ago. And I just wanted a hobby. I just wanted something where I could get out on the road and kind of turn my brain off and just allow myself to feel like free of all of my thoughts and all the things that, cause me to lack peace in some ways. And when I get on my motorcycle, man, I can shut everything else out and I just ride, and it just brings sunshine to whatever bad day maybe I'm having. It makes everything better. Yeah. So I highly encourage you to get one.
If you could talk to my wife, that would be great. I think I would love, but watching you get on yours makes me want one.
Yeah.
And watching you ride off and thinking it's beautiful weather and you're on the motorcycle.
Yeah.
And it does make me want to get one. So, honey, if you're watching this, please listen to Pastor Chris.
Let him get a motorcycle. He needs it for his emotional well-being, his mental health. He needs it.
My wife knows that this is dangerous. Yeah. So she knows that I could get in trouble with that.
Let me ask one more personal question, because I think a lot of times when we talk about managing our emotions, a lot of times we think of anger, we think of wrath, we think of bitterness, we think of all of those negative things. Has there ever been a time where you've had a positive emotion that has, like when something happened, you had a positive emotion that kind of went off the charts in a good way?
Yeah. So going away from the spiritual life, obviously when your kids come to Christ or you baptize your kids, those are big moments. But Isaac won the county golf championship. My youngest son 2 years ago. He won it again this year, which is pretty cool. They didn't have it in COVID, so he's back-to-back winners. But and I say that as a humble brag, of course.
Sure.
It's a dad brag.
Should.
But he won in a shortened tournament in the midst of a torrential downpour, and he came back from 6 strokes to win it. And it was a shortened tournament, so he had to come back, quicker. And he shot the round of his life, and he plays a a playoff all in the torrential downpour, and I was able to walk with him and watch this, and it was one of the greatest moments sports wise. Secondly, I remember when the Maryland Terrapins won the basketball championship, NCAA tournament, back in the day, and I got to tell you, that was probably the greatest sports moment outside of my own family of my life, to watch the Maryland Terrapins basketball. I follow them to the T. I love Maryland Terps basketball, and so I watched them, and they won the championship, and I remember losing, just excited about that. I'd gone to a few games that year. Yeah. How about you?
Mine is pretty similar to your Maryland one, because being from Ohio and then living away from Ohio for as long as we did, I never let go of my sports allegiances to the Ohio teams. And so I've been a suffering Cleveland sports fan for my entire life. And so 3 or 4 years ago, when the Cavs won the NBA Finals, and they finally broke that curse that was upon Cleveland with their pro sports and their lack of titles and everything. I remember going to a buddy's house who had ESPN. I didn't have cable at the time. And then he invited me over, and then another friend of mine who went to our church. This is in Colorado. He was actually from Akron. We were both big Cavs fans, and we watched the game together. I'm telling you, when that clock turned 0, we went berserk nuts. I ended up like jumping on him. We were embracing each other, fell onto the couch. It was really kind of an embarrassing moment, but it was such a highlight. Like, it was such a positive experience. And yeah, just like for a Cleveland sports fan, it was a ray of sunshine.
Huge, yeah.
and otherwise like desolate history.
When we're talking about emotions, that's a great picture, right? Of Cleveland sports is a great picture of motions that are just up and down, right? Every year starts with expectations, and every year ends with disappointment. And things are changing, right? I mean, the Cavs obviously won the NBA championship. The Indians going to the World Series. I mean, there's some good teams, and then the Browns are getting better. So the expectations are still high, but slowly the experience is starting to go up. Hopefully that.
Yeah, and the sad thing is that the expectations are high, but the anticipation is that the other shoe is going to drop. You know,
right.
like it's going to fall apart, because that's just been our history for so many years. But
so if you're watching this not from Ohio, and not a Cleveland fan, it is bigger deal than you think. Like, I watch these folks every year have expectations and desire for their teams to win, and every year eventually the shoe drops and there's disappointment and depression follows, and we can feel it in our church when that happens. It's funny to me to watch,
right?
Because it's unique to any other place, in my opinion.
And it definitely, there's a lack of peace within our congregation when that happens, which is what we're actually going to talk about this in this podcast. And so I want to kind of jump into a little bit of your sermon, but thanks for giving us some insight into you and your emotions, both negative and positive. But the fact of the matter is, Dave, is that every one of us, even if we're not currently in a season of storm and just chaos in our lives, we're all going to face those seasons of storms, whether that we've been in one previously or whether we're going to be in one coming up. We're all going to go through them, and our natural tendency in those seasons of storm is to grab for more and more control. But Jesus actually said that there's another way for us to deal with our out of control, like negative emotions. And so I want to ask this question. Talk about what it is that we're really searching for when emotions get high, and how Jesus offers us what you call the gift of shalom. So talk about that.
So this idea comes from John 14, and this is a moment where Jesus is in the upper room with his disciples, and he has a private moment with them. They partake of the Lord's Supper, or Passover, the Passover meal, after he washed their feet, and he began to talk with them. And one of the things he says to them is, I'm going to leave you. And Peter responds and says, I'm going to go with you. And Jesus says, you can't go with me where I'm going. And Peter says, I will die. I will go with you. You can't stop me, And so when we read John 14, it begins with, don't let your hearts be troubled. And then he comes back to this point in verse 27 where he says, peace I give to you. My peace I give to you. And what we find is this word that he most likely had spoken, obviously New Testament written in Greek, Old Testament written in Hebrew. Most likely Jesus spoke Hebrew or Aramaic, and it was the word shalom. And shalom is this idea of having the cracks of your foundation filled. There are no cracks in your walls of the house. And it's this idea that your life is fulfilled. It's whole. It's together. And Jesus is that shalom. So in our lives, when we think about our emotions, usually emotions run out of control because we feel like there's something missing. There's a crack in the system. There's something isn't going well. Now, certainly we're talking about negative emotions. The positive emotions are when things are full and there's wholeness. So when you're riding your motorcycle, there's wholeness, there's fulfillment.
There's no cracks.
There's no cracks. If I'm on a golf course having a good round, it's wholeness, it's beauty. But when we're not having that, when the storms of life are raging and the waves are crashing in, we don't feel wholeness. And so what we're looking for is something to fill the gaps, to fill the cracks and the crevasses. And that is the word shalom. It literally has the idea of filling the cracks. And that's really when we're emotionally charged. So let's take our culture right now with the debate about masks or not masks, vaccines or not vaccines, the debate about what's happening racially and how to deal with that and whether to believe this thing or that thing. What we see in politically, the division politically, what we're really looking for, if we're being honest, is something that will come in and fill what we believe are the gaping places, the places of these cracks in what we see as a foundation. And when there's cracks in the foundation, you know the whole thing can crumble. And that's what's happening right before our eyes. And what Jesus says is, I have something for you, and it's peace. Yeah. Peace is what we really are looking for. It is this shalom, that when our emotions are high, this is something that can come back and fill the cracks. Yeah. This is something that can satisfy the unwavering and instability that we feel, most likely because of fear, right? There are runaway fears that create high emotions.
Yeah, and you had mentioned in your sermon that the peace that we often look for in this world is transactional and circumstantial. Why don't you explain that and explain why it's different than the peace that Jesus offers?
Yeah, so think about peace in our world. Whenever we look for something of peace, look for something to bring us peace in the midst of our emotions, usually it is going to be, almost every time, it is going to be based upon what I have currently or what I'm bringing to my life currently. So let's use an example. When you asked a question a little bit ago about what brings happiness and sunshine, well, I find it interesting that both of us answered with something we have. Yeah. A motorcycle, golf, trip, whatever, getaway. It's circumstantial, right? Because what if it's raining and I can't ride the motorcycle? Or what if we're not able to travel? Or what if I'm not able to get on the golf course? It's circumstantial, right? It's something based upon circumstances. This is the way we view peace globally. We look at it as something I have to get or something I have to get rid of. So it's circumstantial. If I get rid of the circumstance, if I have this spouse, if I have this job, if I have this money, if I have this house, if I have this health report, all of a sudden my emotions will change. Circumstantial, transactional. Whenever we think of peace, it's always, I'm going to do this, or I'm going to do this for you, you do this for me. So we think about relational peace it's kind of like in our marriages, right? Honey, I'll do this for you, but I expect this in return. It's transactional. Whenever countries sit down together to do a peace treaty, it's transactional. They sit down and sign a document. It's, I give you this, you give me that. And we do this with God. We come to God and say, I will do this for you if you just bring me this peace. But in Jesus comes to bring that peace by the security that he found on the cross, that he secured our peace. And then by his resurrection, we then are offered that peace, that he made peace with God so that we can have the peace of God rule in our hearts. And that's the picture, is that peace from God is not circumstantial. It is not based upon what we have or what we get. It's not based upon what we get rid of. Yeah. It's based upon what we're given by Christ. And it's not transactional because it's not based upon anything we do. It's based upon what God has done for us. And so that's when we talk about it being circumstantial and transactional, it is that God took care of it for us and he now gives it to us. There's nothing we have to do nothing we have to do to attain it. We have to take it and receive it and believe it.
Yeah. You talk about that circumstantial, and I think a lot of times we equate the presence of peace with a lack of problems. Right. We think that if life will just go the way that we think that it should go, then we will find this peace that eludes us. The question that I want to ask to that is, can you explain to our viewers why a lack of problems doesn't necessarily bring a presence of peace? And if that's the case, we obviously know that Jesus does. But why does a lack of problems not always bring the presence of peace?
Yeah, so let's think about this. Let's go back to that John 14. So he brings up in John 14, I want to give you peace. My peace I give to you, not as the world gives, not circumstantial or transactional, but I'm going to give it to you differently. I'm going to give it to you differently. And then he comes back to it at the end of the conversation, and he says, in this world you will have tribulation. But take heart, I have overcome the world. So he comes back to peace, and he talks about this idea of, hey, I've got peace for you. So therefore, don't let your hearts be troubled. There's going to be peace in the midst of the chaos. In the disciples' world, they were running through the emotions that Jesus was going to leave them. Jesus knew that their emotions were going to run high because he was going to go to a cross, and all of them will abandon him except for one. Peter will deny him. Judas will betray him. And yet in the midst of this, knowing this was going to happen, Jesus says, in this world you'll have tribulation, but take heart, I have overcome the world. When we think of peace, right, we think of, I will have peace when the storm ends. I will have peace when this circumstance is over. I will have peace when resolution happens. And Jesus says, no. In this world you'll have tribulation, but take heart, I have overcome the world. In fact, you can have peace in the midst of the storm. Yeah. You can have peace in the midst of the circumstance. You can have peace in the midst of this situation that seems out of control. And that's the difference, right? Yeah. It's in the midst of it we can have this peace. So when we think about this idea, peace is the presence of something greater. Mm-hmm. It's the presence of God in our lives. If I know God is here, if I know God is present, then whatever I'm facing, it doesn't really matter. Right. It's kind of like when Jesus was on the boat. What they failed to realize was the presence of Jesus could overcome every storm. Yeah. And therefore, you could be on the boat in a storm and know you're not going to drown because Jesus was there. Yeah. And in the same way, I think it's similar for us. Knowing the presence of God is really what fills the gap. It's really what fills the crevasses and cracks of our lives. Then whatever takes place, I don't have to fear anything else. If I know that I have God's presence, if I have cancer, I'm okay. Mm-hmm. I got God's presence. If I go get this health report or a financial report or a job loss, I'm going to be okay because I know God is present. All of a sudden, I've taken my attention to a greater person instead of my circumstance.
Right. That reminds me of my own illustration. About 7 years ago, my brother passed away. He had a brain tumor that he fought for nearly 7 years, and it finally, he finally succumbed to it, and the Lord took him home. And my parents asked me to preach my brother's funeral, and he's my big brother, right? He's 4 years older than me, and one of the hardest things I ever had to do, and I stood up in front of this crowd of people, I don't even know how many people there were, and basically preached the goodness of God. And, and tried to bring comfort and tried to bring hope in the midst of this congregation of people that were grieving. And I myself was grieving. And I had so many people that asked me afterwards, like, how in the world did you preach your own brother's funeral? And all I could say was, I knew that God was good. Like my belief was established. My thinking was right. And therefore I was able to get through, even though I didn't understand the peace that God had given me, it was there. Yeah. Have you ever had a moment in your life where the circumstances and the situation around you was overwhelming, but for whatever reason, God just gave you overwhelming peace?
Yeah. And it's kind of similar stories, being by bedsides of friends and people that I loved and knew, and yet I felt this overwhelming sense of peace in the midst of it. I know a couple health moments where I walked through myself, not nearly to the point of brain tumors and death, but an autoimmune issue that I didn't know I had. It ended up with a blood clot in my intestine, in the main portal valve of the intestine, and that affects everything. And you lose that, you lose all ability. to be able, you feed out of a bag and you all of those things that could happen. And I had that. And I remember in the hospital for 5 days. And I remember just this peace that overwhelmed me in the midst of it. Like, I was pretty worried in the front end, but there was just this peace that overwhelmed me of God being in control. And it was the presence of God. Like, the presence of God was better, bigger, stronger than what I was facing. And that's exactly the same idea. I remember facing that personally, and man, I was worried. I was worried about my family. I thought of my kids without their dad. You don't know what's happening in that moment. And then I found out I have a rare autoimmune issue, and now have that under control with some help. But I remember that feeling of just being overwhelmed, like the waves. It wasn't waves. I was under the water. And yet I felt this sense of God's peace. Yeah. And God was like, it's going to be okay. Yeah. I'm with you. And it reminded me, for me to live as Christ and to die as gain. It reminded me of Job's words that said, he gives, he takes away, blessed be the name of the Lord.
Yeah. What would you say to that person that's watching this that is not experiencing peace? Maybe they have a lack of peace because of their overcharged emotions that are ruling them. What would you advise to that believer that might be watching this podcast as we close this out?
I would just remind them of this, of peace is a mindset. It is a mindset that you have to begin with, to say, in the midst of my emotions, where does my peace lie? And what I want to say to you, if you are a follower of Christ, you have the one thing that matters in life settled, and that is your eternal destiny in Jesus. And I think this is huge. This is why over and over again the Bible comes back to 792 times the Bible talks about peace. It is this idea that you have an ability to understand that eternity has been set, and you're at peace with God. And if you're at peace with God, then whatever you're feeling, whatever you're walking through, whatever you're experiencing, you can also experience peace. If the thing that matters for eternity is settled, then the thing that matters in temporary life can be settled as well. And that doesn't mean you don't feel it. That doesn't mean you don't feel anxious a bit about it. That doesn't mean you're not going to feel the weight of it. It just means that you can be in peace. And I love, as Isaiah said in Isaiah 26, he has perfect peace whose mind is steadied on you. Why? Because he trusts in you, God. And may that be true of us, that peace can guard our hearts and minds because we know that in him we have an answer. We have peace in Christ.
Let's have our hearts and our minds steadied on Christ. Thanks for taking us deeper this week, Dave. Man, we appreciate so much.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Deeper Podcast. To listen to more content or get more info, visit crossroadswired.com or PastorDaveVance.com.